I think it's that time of year when everybody's starting to get sick a little bit. Anybody in your family gotten sick? Maybe a mom, dad, sister, brother. Well, for the first time ever, my wife got sick. Not the first time ever, but the first time ever that I've been married with a wife who got sick. So that was new. And I felt like, okay, I'm the husband, like I got to take care of her. So when she got sick, I started getting into chemistry a little bit, saying, okay, so I'm supposed to give her this at this time, and then 4 hours later, I got to give her this thing, but then she's got to have these vitamins, and I felt like a doctor without any training, right? YouTube training, right? And I was trying to take care of her, and it was funny because I ran into my dad in the hallway, and he's like, hey, how's Alexandra? I'm like, oh, she's sick. And he's like, oh, come with me. So I go into his office, and he's got all these medical supplies. Okay? You think he's a doctor in theology. He's actually a doctor. No, he's actually a doctor in theology, but he dabbles in the medicine field, I guess. I don't know. But he knows all this stuff, and it's ridiculous. You guys have a parent like that who knows like all this medical stuff? It's weird. It's like, okay, how do you know all this? You must have read books and stuff, which he has. So I go in, and he's like, all right, so this thing, it suppresses the cough. This thing, it brings out the cough. This thing makes the phlegm go down. This thing brings the phlegm up. What do you want? And I'm like, I don't know. How about you tell me what I need? I needed some help. I needed him to tell me. So if you feel like, man, I don't know how to take care of my sickness, remember, you can talk to your parents. Even when you're grown up, you can still talk to your parents about sickness and how to feel better. But I needed help. I couldn't figure it out on my own. I really wasn't good at it. Well, sometimes when I say you're supposed to help people, you're supposed to serve people. And in Philippians, we've seen Paul says that we're supposed to serve one another. Right? One of the things that's really hard for us is sometimes we don't know how to do it. We're supposed to serve people. How do you do that? We're supposed to love people. How do you do that? You're supposed to encourage people. How am I supposed to start? What I want to look at today is our next passage in Philippians where Paul gives us two guys who serve as examples to us. Two guys, one named Timothy, another named Epaphroditus, and I think we can also learn something from the author himself, Paul. So we're going to learn three things this morning about what it looks like to really serve and help people. So I want you to turn in your Bibles to Philippians chapter 2, where it's all found. Philippians chapter 2, verse 19. You might have noticed on your worksheet that John went crazy this week, and he's covering 12 verses. This is the longest section we're going to go through at one time in this book, and we're actually getting to the halfway point. This is our last sermon from Philippians in 2019. The next time we pick up Philippians 3 will be in the new year. But I want you to see in this big chunk that it's less Paul telling the Philippians, hey, you should do this, this, and this. It's more, hey, this is what's going on in my life. Here's what's going on with Timothy. I'm going to send him to you. I'm going to send Epaphroditus to you. And it's all these like travel plans. It's basically Paul's agenda. He's like, this is what he's saying he wants to do. So as we cover this big text, I want you to remember what we've studied before in Philippians 2, where Paul said that we're supposed to be like Jesus in our humility. We're supposed to try to serve one another like Jesus served us. Also, we're supposed to work out our salvation. Right? If we're really saved people, we're supposed to act like it. We're supposed to act like Jesus. Then he said one of the ways we do that is by not complaining. It's by working hard to serve one another, just like Paul served the Philippians. So in verse 19, it comes after all of those instructions. Now he's going to give some practical instructions to what he wants to do. So check it out. This is Philippians 2:19. Paul says, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon. So imagine this. You get this letter from somebody, which we're going to find out later. It was Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus carries this letter. You get it. And Paul says, I'm going to send Timothy to you soon. So Timothy isn't there when the letter comes. Paul's plan is, I'm going to send Timothy after I send the letter. So plan number one is to send the letter. Plan number two is to send this guy Timothy. It says, I want to send him to you soon, that I too may be cheered by news of you. He basically says, I care about you guys, and I want to know what's going on in your church. So I'm going to send Timothy, and he's going to let me know how things are going with you guys. Verse 20, now he starts to talk about Timothy. He says, for I have no one like him who will be genuinely concerned for your welfare. Right? He could send a lot of people from Rome, and that's where Paul is. We got to remember, Paul is about 1,000 miles away from these Philippians. It's a long way away, especially in the ancient world. And he's in Rome in jail, and he's got people who are Christians who are around him, and he says, I can send a lot of people. But there's one guy who stands out. From all the people I can send you, this one guy, Timothy, he's the one guy that I know for certain will really love you, really, really, genuinely caring for you. This guy, he's got that reputation. Verse 21, he says, for they all seek their own interests, not those of Christ, not those of Jesus Christ. Right? There's a lot of Christians that Paul knew that they're saved and they're fine and they're doing some good things, but their main concern is themselves. Their main concern is how I'm doing, how I'm feeling, how my life is, how my schooling is, how my sports are. Like, that's their concern. But Paul says, this guy Timothy, his main concern is not him, it's Jesus Christ. And Jesus tells us his concern for us is that we would love one another. So that's what he said he would do. Look at verse 22. Paul says, but you know Timothy's proven worth, how as a son with a father, he has served with me in the gospel. Timothy was one of the guys who came to Philippi with Paul. So they know Timothy. Maybe he was significantly younger back then, so they remember him maybe as an early 20s, early 30s guy. Now he's a little bit older, but Paul says, you guys remember Timothy. He was a good servant. He served you guys. You know how he's good with preaching. You know how he's good with serving people in the church. Verse 23 says, I hope, therefore, to send him to you just as soon as I will see how it will go with me. So Paul's saying, here's the reason I'm waiting to send Timothy, because I don't know what's going to happen to me in jail. Maybe I'll die, maybe I'll live. He's already said that. He says, I think I'm going to live. And if I do, I'm going to wait till I know for sure. And then once I figure out what's going to happen with me, I'm going to send Timothy, and he'll give you news about me. Just remember, there's no text messages, there's no phone calls, there's no emails back then. So delivering messages is kind of hard, and you got to time it right. So that's why there's so much like instructions about the timing of all of this. Now in verse 25, he talks about the guy who's carrying the letter. He says, I've thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, the guy who's holding the letter, giving it to the Philippians. He says, he's my brother and my fellow worker and fellow soldier and your messenger and minister to my need. So at that point, you're like, what are you talking about? Basically, at the end of the book of Philippians, we find out that Epaphroditus is with Paul, not because he's been with him for a long time. He's a Philippian. He's one of the guys from the church in Philippi, Epaphroditus is. And the reason he's with Paul is because the Philippians sent him to Paul to give Paul a gift. So imagine, right, putting it in our terms, imagine you got the Narrow, and then you've got our Compass Bible Church in Guatemala. Imagine stuff's going bad down there. Pastor Amadeo, let's say he's in jail or whatever. Right? And we get together and we say, I want to send him a gift. We want to give him maybe food, maybe money, something to take care of him, maybe clothes, maybe parchments, maybe things to write with. Let's do that. So I need a volunteer to go walk down to Guatemala and give it to him. Right? Who's it going to be? I don't know. Probably not me. I wouldn't want to do it. Right? Epaphroditus is the guy who does it. He walks a long way. He sails a long way to get to Rome, to this jail cell, to minister to Paul. So he brought this gift. That's why Paul says, this guy's legit. He's a messenger. He's your messenger and minister to my need. He's helped me. He's served me. Verse 26, problems though. For he has been longing for all of you and has been distressed. Why? Because you heard that he was ill. So Epaphroditus is like someone, one of you, that we send out to Guatemala, right? And let's say you get down to Guatemala, you present your gift, and all's good, and then you fall sick. So sick that you almost die. You get some weird disease where you're bedridden for months. Right? At that point, you've got a lot of things to be concerned about if you're that guy, if you're that girl who goes down. Epaphroditus, his main concern is not how he's feeling. His main concern is he's been sad because somehow news of his illness went back to Philippi, and he's sad because he's thinking, my friends are worried about me. My friends think I'm sick. My friends think I'm dead maybe. They don't even know what happened. So Epaphroditus has been sad after his sickness. Think about it. That's crazy. He's more concerned with how the Philippians feel about his sickness than he's concerned about his own sickness. Verse 27 says, indeed, about Epaphroditus, he was ill, near to death, but God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. He's saying God was merciful on Epaphroditus by not letting him die, and he says God was merciful on him, but he's also merciful on me, because if Epaphroditus died, I would have been really upset. Paul's saying I would have been really sad if Epaphroditus walked all the way down to Rome to give me a gift and then got sick because he did that. I would have been really upset about that. So he says God was good. He had mercy on us. Verse 28, He says, I am more eager to send him, therefore, that you may rejoice at seeing him again. That makes sense. Paul's like, I want you guys to see this guy who was at your church and then he's well, and I want you guys to do a big, potluck reunion and be happy about him being back. He says also that I may be less anxious. Paul's concerned about this guy. He's like, I want you guys to be okay. I want him to be okay. So I want you guys to get back together again. Verse 29. Paul gives instructions now. He says, so receive Epaphroditus in the Lord with all joy and honor such men, for he nearly died for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was lacking in your service to me. You might wonder, why did Paul have to tell the Philippians to receive Epaphroditus with joy? Like, wouldn't you be happy to see the missionary who left? Here's the problem. Epaphroditus was only like half successful. His job was to go give this gift to Paul, which, ding, success, he did it well, right? But he was also supposed to help Paul, and he was supposed to minister to Paul. But here's the problem. Epaphroditus was not able to do that. Epaphroditus got sick. I mean, imagine you go down to be a missionary in Guatemala, and you get sick, and all the Guatemalan people are taking care of you. You'd be like, well, that was kind of not the purpose of me going here. I was supposed to take care of you, and you have to take care of me. That's a bummer. So the Philippians might, we don't know, but they might be thinking, Epaphroditus, you're a loser, right? You went down there and you got sick and you died. Like, you're a loser. Like, we don't even want you back. Like, we don't know how the Philippians felt. But Paul is saying, hey, you better receive him. You better honor him because he got sick. That was something outside of his control, right? The problem is sometimes we do that too when people go out and try to serve, but they don't meet our expectations. Sometimes we don't receive them with joy because all we're concerned about is that they didn't meet our expectations. Here's the thing. Paul says, you better receive guys like Epaphroditus with joy. So 3 characters, and I want to learn 3 things from these 3 characters. First of all, Timothy. So point number 1 is all about Timothy. I want you to check this out. In verse 20, Paul says, I have no one like him who will be genuinely concerned for your welfare. If you want to serve people, and if you want to help people, here's what Timothy can teach you. Point number 1, develop genuine care like Timothy. Develop genuine care like Timothy. What does it mean for you to really serve people? Well, one of the things that you've got to do and that you can learn from Timothy is that he really cared for people. He really loved people. He's not selfish. He's not thinking of his own interests. He's thinking of the interest of Jesus. Have you ever talked to somebody who maybe introduces themselves to you and starts talking to you, and while you're in a conversation with them, they're like looking past you to the next person that they want to talk to? Like their friend comes in and you're talking to them, and their friend comes in and they're like, oh, wait a minute, hold on, my friend's here. And then they leave, and it's like, okay, well, you didn't really care. Like you were just cared about that other person. You weren't genuinely concerned with me. Here's the thing. Timothy was not that type of guy. Timothy was the guy who would have the conversation with you and would take a genuine interest. He'd ask you questions about school. He'd ask you how things are going on at home. He'd ask you how you're obeying God. He'd ask you what your Bible reading's like. He'd ask you how you're praying. He would take a genuine interest in you. That's what was so unique about him. And I think it's true of our group too. Right? How many of us really, genuinely take an interest solely in the other person, not in themselves? Right? That's why Paul said the only person I can send to you that is going to do this like really, really well is Timothy. Here's the thing. I want all of you to shoot to be like Timothy. I want you to have that reputation as a person who genuinely loves and genuinely cares about people. I don't want you to just get that reputation so that people will think, oh, wow, that girl is really godly. She really loves people. Or that guy, man, he really cares about people. That's not the purpose. The purpose is so that you'll serve God's people. I want you to be like Timothy so that you can really love people. And here's the thing. You will never start loving people and serving people unless you start actually doing it. Just do it. Right? You might think, well, I don't have that reputation. Right? If in my small group, my leader was going to send one person to go visit some old lady in the hospital, it wouldn't be me because I'm a goof off or because I talk about myself. It wouldn't be me. Here's the thing. Start that now. You can develop a reputation for caring and loving right now. You could develop it this week as you got people around maybe your dining room table, or you're in someone else's dining room table at Thanksgiving that you don't normally know. Right? When all your cousins say, wow, you're so much older, you've grown up. Right? You're going to hear that like 50 times this week. Like, oh, wow, you're so big. Right? Unless you haven't grown yet. Then it's like, wow, you're still so small. And then next year, they're going to be like, whoa, you're huge. What happened to you? It's like, yeah, remember when you called me small last year? Guess what? That's what happened to me. So when I was in 7th grade, I was 5'2". When I was in 8th grade, I was 5'8". So even my wife was surprised. Wow, 5'8". Right. It's nothing to clap about. I didn't do anything. I just ate. Just ate food. Just got genetics and stuff. I don't know how that worked. But you can develop a reputation for loving people by this week when your cousins are in town or when you're over at your grandparents' house to start talking to them. And instead of being like, oh, hey, Grandma, how was your year? Hey, what'd you get me, by the way? You know, Christmas? Hey, so like I got this Amazon wish list, so yeah, how you doing? You do? Okay, you're good, right? No death? Okay, good. Hey, you wanna give me something? Right? That's how some of us act. And I know it's like that was an extreme case, but really that's how some of us think, right? When you're talking to your grandparents or you're talking to your aunts and uncles and they're just so slow and so boring. It's like, okay, yeah, I've heard that you told me this story before about the cat. I know. I know Cashmere's not doing as good as she's doing before. My grandma had a cat named Cashmere. Whatever, anyway. But you know what it's like to talk to them and then like you're bored, right? And you know what it's like to be like, okay, when's the next thing? Here's my challenge for you. This week, take a genuine interest in people. Actually care. If your grandma cares about her cat and you don't care about her cat, so what? Talk to her like you actually care. Develop a genuine care for her, right? I don't care about cats. I don't care, right? And Ashley's like, oh, you don't care about cats? No, because she works with the animals, right? I don't care. Like if someone tells me about their cat, like I don't care about their cat, right? But I care about them. And if they care about their cat, then I guess I care about their cat. A little bit. Not as much as they do. But if I genuinely care for people, even if it's something I don't think is worth it, I want to take a genuine interest in people. That's what Timothy did. That's what I want you to do this week. You've got extra opportunities to do that. Once you think about those conversations, once you think about the way you treat people when they're going through hard times, maybe instead of the Thanksgiving meal, think of small groups. Think of on Wednesday nights when you sit in a small group with your people, when some of them are going through hard things. First of all, do you know about it? Second of all, do you ask them about it? Third of all, you can't give second of all twice. Third of all, do you pray for them? Fourth, like, do you care? Right? All these things. That's what Timothy would do. Really, Timothy does it because that's what Jesus would have done. Really smart people, when they look at the book of Philippians, they look at Philippians 2, 19 to 30, and they say, why on earth is this here? Usually, travel plans and things like that come at the end of the letter. Why is it here in Philippians 2? Well, I think one of the reasons is because Timothy and Epaphroditus are great examples of everything we've been learning in Philippians 2. That Paul includes them. He even says that Timothy is the one who is concerned about their interests and the interest of Jesus, not his own, right? In my Bible, if you just like look over to the left a little bit, here's what Philippians 2:3 says. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourself. That's what Timothy did. Verse 4, let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interest of others. That's exactly what Timothy did. And the language is the same. I think that's why this is included here. Because Paul wants to show that, oh yeah, look to everybody's interest other than your own. That's impossible. No, it's not. Paul's saying, I'm going to send you a guy who's like that. Follow his example. Be like that. And I know Timothy isn't your pastor. The Narrow would be a lot better if Timothy was the pastor of the Narrow. But you got people in your life, right? If Timothy was your small group leader, maybe you'd have better conversations. I don't know. But it doesn't really matter. You've got people in your life who are selfless. You've got people in your life who care about you. Be like them. That's what Paul's trying to do. He's sending them an example. It's also an example that we should follow. But notice that all those examples are examples that are like Jesus, right? Because Philippians 2:5, going on in that passage, says, have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus. Jesus was humble. Jesus was a servant, even though he didn't need to be. Ultimately, Timothy, Luke, all the guys that Paul knew and served with, Epaphroditus, Gaius, all those guys, they were just trying to be like Jesus Christ. And that's what ultimately we're supposed to be like as well. Jesus saw people who were hurting and helpless, and here's what he said. He said, they're like sheep without a shepherd in Matthew 9. He said they're helpless, they're harassed. People who don't know the gospel, that's what the context was there. People who just haven't heard the good news. That compassion is what we should shoot for too. It's interesting how Paul says Timothy is the only guy who doesn't care about his own interests first. He cares about the interests of Jesus Christ first. And I kind of glanced over this, but I want you to see what are the interests of Jesus Christ. Right? It's one thing not to be focused on yourself. Right? Some people are not focused on themselves. They're just focused on their sport. And they'll do anything for their sport, and they're not even focused on themselves, even if it hurts their body. Right? So the idea isn't that you just don't focus on yourself. It's that you focus on the interests of Jesus. What are the interests of Jesus? Write this passage down. John 13:34. Jesus, before he left, he said, "A new commandment I give to you." This is the interest of Jesus right here, that you love one another. Just as I've loved you, you are also to love one another. You might say, that's not a new commandment. I know my Bible. That's not a new commandment, to love one another. Leviticus 19:18 says that. Just to love your neighbor as yourself. That's not a new commandment, Jesus. Well, it is, because he modifies the commandment. He doesn't just say, love one another. He says, just as I have loved you, you are also to love one another. Now, how did Jesus love us? Back to Philippians 2:5-11, right? Selflessly, he emptied himself. He came to earth when he didn't have to. He came and he offered his body up to be beaten up and sacrificed for you and for me. Now he says, I want you to do that with other people. I want you to sacrifice for other people and to really love them and really care about them. Timothy cared, and he was one of those guys that you just knew he cared. I want you to develop that as well. Start this week, maybe by sitting through some boring conversations that are boring. They're boring, I know. I've sat through them. They're boring, I know. But sit through them and don't think, well, John said they're boring. John said they're boring. No, think I'm supposed to love them and care about them and take an interest in them. That's what Timothy did. I want you to notice what Epaphroditus did. Look back at verse 25. This is Philippians 2:25. It says, I thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother, fellow worker, fellow soldier, and your messenger and minister to my need. Epaphroditus was the guy who raised his hand and he said, I'll walk to Guatemala. Right? Specifically for him, from Philippi to Rome. He's the guy who said, I'm willing to go. Think this through. He didn't just get on a plane, fly down, say hi to some Guatemalan kids, high five them, take pictures on Instagram, and then go back. Right? He didn't just do that. He walked and sailed and ate bad food, probably took without food. Right? We don't know how he got sick, but traveling like that in the ancient world, a lot of people got sick. I mean, traveling now on airplanes, sometimes people get sick. But back then, it was a lot worse. We think that he probably would not have gotten this sickness if he didn't go and sacrifice. You see what I'm getting at? He put himself out there, and he went to serve, even though he probably wasn't forced to. We don't know. It doesn't say, but most likely, the Philippians didn't say, Epaphroditus, you're the only one that has to go. We don't even know how old this guy was. We don't know if he was young. We don't know if he was old. We don't know if he had kids. We don't know if he had a wife. We don't know any of that. All we know is this guy went by himself. He went, and he served. It takes guts to do that. It's scary to do that. Point number 2, I want you, like Epaphroditus, to put yourself out there. Point number 2 is this: put yourself out there like Epaphroditus. Now, we're not taking volunteers to go walk to Rome, thankfully, to visit some guy in jail who's doing just fine, right? I just want you to think through being Epaphroditus. There's so many reasons why you could say, I don't want to go. There are so many reasons. Like they've got Christians in Rome. Dude, the Christians in Rome, some of them are rich. Why do we need to give him a gift? Why do we need to spend all this money on giving him a gift? We're poor. And I know it sounds weird, but in Macedonia, they were more poor. They're poorer Christians. There were some rich Christians, there were some poor Christians, just like there are today. But you've got this church that's made up of maybe some people who are rich, but a lot of them who are poor, who give and give and give, and then they give this gift to Paul. And Paul's like, hey, thank you for the gift. At the end of the book, he says, thank you. He says, I'm really thankful because the gift that you gave, verse 18 of Philippians 4:18, he says, I've received full payment and more, and I'm well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gift you sent. And here's what he calls it: a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. It says, you sacrificed for me. And God saw that sacrifice, and it was worth it for you because God will reward you. Epaphroditus put himself out there. He even got sick for this. It says that he risked his life. You might not risk your life. Maybe you'll never be asked to risk your life for the gospel, and that's okay. But you are going to be asked to risk some things to obey God. And I would guess even this week you'll be asked to risk some things, like your free time, like being comfortable, like hanging out with your same group of friends every weekend. You might be asked to sacrifice a little bit of that to put yourself out there to serve the church like Epaphroditus did. Notice that his concern was all about the Philippians. He said about Philippians and about Paul. He said, I'm concerned because you're concerned that I'm sick. His concern wasn't, I need to get back home because I'm sick. I need to get back home. I need the better doctors. No, that's not his concern. His concern is the people. If you can just get your concern off of yourself and onto other people, you know what will happen to your growth in Christ? It will shoot up. Because that's the one thing that Philippians 2 ought to teach you, that your concern cannot just be on you and about how you feel this Christmas and how you feel this Thanksgiving and the gifts that you didn't get and all this you. That needs to stop. That's what non-Christians do. They're all focused on themselves. If you're a Christian, stop focusing on you. Even the sacrifice. Epaphroditus' concern isn't about his sacrifice. He could have been concerned about his sacrifice, and that would have been fine and good. We would have said, Epaphroditus, you should be concerned about your sacrifice. But he's not. He's just concerned about the people. 1 John 3:16 kind of displays this. It's a passage that gives us instruction that I think Epaphroditus did really well. He was a great example for us. 1 John 3:16 says, by this we know love, that Jesus laid down his life for us. Right? That's what love looks like. And then it says, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. If Jesus walked into this room and asked you to walk to Guatemala, I bet you'd be like, okay, I guess. It's Jesus told me to, so I guess I'll be fine, right? So I'm going to do it because I'm serving him. Right? If your small group leader said, hey, I want you to walk down to Guatemala and give a gift, you'd probably be like, yeah, no. Like, no thanks. Something interesting about 1 John 3 is it says that the way that Jesus expects you to love is not by laying down your life for him. In a sense, you do that, but the practical way that you do that is laying down your lives for the brothers, for the sisters, right? That's a word that means Christians, for other believers, for other people in your small group, for your team, for the people that you call siblings, brother, sister at home, for your parents, for your grandparents, for your small group leaders. Like, that's what it really looks like to love. It's not all about writing cards. That's great. It's not all about saying nice things. It's also about doing. You want to keep those two things together, and 1 John 3 certainly says that. It says, let us not love only in word or talk, but let's also love in deed and in truth. You want to put those two things together. So how can you put yourself out there? Well, some of you already do a good job at this, but you could put yourself out there to serve our church, Compass Bible Church, by serving the kids. I know that seems to be like the one thing that junior hires do, is like serving kids, right? And that's great. You're serving real people, whether you believe it or not. They are real people with real hearts and real souls, right? They're real people, even if they're small. You might serve the infants. You might serve the 2-year-olds. You might serve the 3-year-olds. You might serve the kindergartners. You might serve the Cubbies and the Sparks and the TNT kids. You might serve at games at Awana. You might serve on a weekend service at the 9 a.m. service with a group of, 4th graders. You might serve them, right? That's great. And some of you do that. I want you to keep serving. Don't let other stuff get in the way and say, oh, well, this semester's hard at school, so I'm not going to serve this year. Because, school's going to get hard. Or, my sports team, it's just more stuff. Like, I need to not serve. I'd encourage you. It's better for you to serve. It's the truth. It's better for you to sacrifice to serve and be like Epaphroditus. He put himself out there. Maybe you're thinking, well, I already do that. How about at home? If you're the first person in your family to put yourself out there when a job needs to get done, when the trash needs to be taken out, when the dishwasher needs to be unloaded, when the washer needs to be emptied or whatever, the dryer, when you got to move the stuff from the washer to the dryer, and you got to ask your parents, like, okay, so you want this hang dried and this, like that. Be the first person to put yourself out there and say, I'll do that. My siblings aren't doing it, but it's fine. I'll do it. I'll put myself out there. That's what Epaphroditus did. Trust me. And every time you do that, it's a sacrifice, right? Because that's why you don't do it. You know it's a good thing to do to take the trash can out. You know that feeling when you go by the trash can and it's full and like you keep shoving it down and you keep shoving it down, like, I should probably empty this, but don't have time because I got this thing. Shove it down, right? I do that. Sorry. Confession. I do that. I used to do that all the time. But the reason I didn't want to take out the trash is because I wanted to do something else. I had to get back to my video game. I had to get back to the TV show. I had to go. I had to be somewhere. I couldn't be late. I had to do this or that or the other thing. So, to serve is always sacrifice. And don't get me wrong thinking, oh man, like, it's not a big deal to serve. It's easy. It doesn't matter. Like, it won't hurt. It won't be hard. It won't take up any time. No, it does. But just know, I know we talked about this a lot last week, where we said it's always worth it to serve. God notices every service. Here's another verse that I didn't give you last week. I saved it for this week. Hebrews 13, verse 16. It says, do not neglect to do good and to share what you have. That's good for siblings to learn right there, right? To share what you have. To let your sister wear your shoes when you don't want her to. My wife had sisters, and they always stole her clothes, borrowed her clothes, right? My brother and I, we shared clothes. We borrowed them. No, I borrowed your shirt. That's fine. I just borrowed your shoes. We didn't borrow any dresses from each other, so that was good. You know, we borrowed a lot? Shorts and socks. Because we had the same socks, and it was like, which ones are yours? Which one? I don't know. That's kind of gross. Never mind. But it's totally true. You could be the one who puts yourself out there and shares with other people. Here's what Hebrews 13, 16 says. Do good and share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. When God sees you, let your siblings wear your clothes. Play the Xbox or whatever. Xbox isn't even like a thing anymore, right? I know it is, but it's not like cool. It's like, whatever. I don't know. I don't play Xbox. But you let them do it, right? Let's just say you share and you let your sibling or your friend do it instead of you. The book of Hebrews says that's a sacrifice. It feels like a sacrifice, right? You let them do it and you don't fight them. You don't say, that's my thing. Those are my shoes. That's my dress. That's my thing. Don't take it. Don't use it. It's mine. It's mine. It's mine. Don't touch it. If you do that, just realize that you're not doing what Hebrews 13 says, where Hebrews 13 says that's a sacrifice and it's pleasing to God. If you can just do that with a good heart and let your things be shared, do that with a good heart, it's a sacrifice. God recognizes that it's a sacrifice. God knows, God sees it, God knows the pain, even if it's a small sense. If your sister wears your white Vans, that's pain. Because they're my white Vans and they're going to get messed up, right? Again, that was another thing like junior high girls wore when I was in junior high. Some of you do. Yeah, I was going to say front row, checker, 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 slip on, slip on. Wow, that's crazy. Checkered right there. Wow, I can't believe those made a comeback. Here's the point. When you share, God sees it as a sacrifice. You got to be willing to do it because God recognizes it as a sacrifice. Those are the two characters. That's the text. But I want you to recognize one more character here who's in the background, who's actually the one writing, Paul. I want you to imagine what it would have been like to be him. He is in this jail cell, tied to that smelly guard that we talked about before, working hard, serving the gospel, doing all these things, right? He gets this guy, Epaphroditus, an old friend, who gives him this gift. And he's like, this is awesome. This is great. Love this gift. Thank you. And then Epaphroditus gets sick, right? Now what does Paul have to do? Well, either Paul or someone close to Paul had to take care of him. Imagine that. You've got this guy who's come to serve you, and now you have to serve him? That's what Paul did. You notice any complaining in here? Anytime Paul says, man, you were just a big bummer. Like, I wish you didn't get sick. It's like such a bummer. Why'd you have to get sick? I'm in jail. I'm the one who's supposed to be taken care of. You don't understand. Right? No, he doesn't do that. He does the opposite. Here's what he does to Epaphroditus. He says, Epaphroditus, you're awesome. You're great. You're an awesome servant. Instead of putting him down. Instead of saying, well, you came to help, but you weren't much of a help. You were actually kind of a bummer and a total burden, and we had to take care of you, and you almost died. I can't believe you did that, right? It's not what he does. And you might think that's ridiculous, but just notice this. There are people who will serve you this Christmas, this Thanksgiving, who will go out of their way to try to serve you, and sometimes what you'll do is say, I don't want that thing. I don't want that food. I don't want that thing. I don't even like that thing. And what you'll do is you'll push back on other people's service. And you'll push back and you'll say, that's a bummer. I wish you hadn't have done that. Maybe you just think it. Here's what Paul did. When Paul had things that didn't go his way, when he had plans for Epaphroditus, I'm sure he wanted him to go out and preach the gospel. I'm sure he wanted him to serve the sick people. But he had plans and they failed. They didn't work out. And God allowed them to not work out. Just recognize how gracious Paul was with all of that. Point number 3, once you write this down, be gracious when plans fail like Paul. Be gracious when plans fail like Paul. Some of you have plans for what you want to get for Christmas, what you want to eat on Thanksgiving, but instead of your grandma making that turkey she always makes that you want to eat, she makes lobster. I don't like lobster. Actually, that's terrible. Sorry, I don't like lobster. That's gross to me. She makes something you don't, quinoa. There you go. Good. Good. All the healthy people are like, wait, I actually kind of like quinoa. That's not. And all the unhealthy people are like, oh yeah, I don't like that. My mom likes that, and it's straight no. I got out of that. You know that? My mom didn't start doing all the healthy food until I left. So, good. Sorry about it, folks. Now I get to have whatever I want because I live by myself. No. Now my wife makes great food for me. Just notice this. When Paul was dealt a hand, so to speak, when he's given a situation that was not ideal and not exactly what he wanted from Epaphroditus, he didn't want him to get sick, he was gracious, knowing that it wasn't Epaphroditus' fault. It wasn't even his fault he got sick. Some of us get upset when people try to serve us and then it's not what we want. We get upset and we're like, right? I want you to be gracious. Be like the avocado kid. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about? That video where that kid got an avocado in his stocking? Yeah. An avocado. Thanks. Right? This kid's like 3 years old or 4 years old or 5. I don't know. And like he gets an avocado in his stocking for Christmas, which was obviously like a gag joke or whatever. And he's like, oh, thanks. And he's so nice about it. He's like, it's like the nicest kid in the world. Look, you're going to get gifts this Christmas that are lame. I was going to say socks, but I actually really like socks. It took me a while to appreciate socks, and now I appreciate socks. But someone will get you something that's like, man, I wanted that, but you gave me that, right? There's 2 responses you can have. You can either be like bummed, and your body language can show it, right? Thanks. Right? Oh, yeah. Yeah. You got me that last year, right? You could be like that, or you could be gracious in the way that you talk, in the way that you respond, and the way that you act, because ultimately you're thankful not for the gift, but for the person who gave you the gift. Just recognize that. You should be thankful for your grandparents, even if they give you the same pair of socks they gave you last year. Because guess what? They're your grandparents. And without them, you wouldn't be alive. So there you go. That's one thing to be thankful for, right? Be thankful. When plans failed for Paul, he was humble. Reminds me of James 4, right? We read that in the DBR, where James says, hey, you got these plans that you make that are so great and grand, just know this, they're up to review with God. Any plan you make, any decision you make, anything you want to do, God can correct it and say, nope, that's not going to happen. You can either be gracious and humble with your plans and gracious with people like Paul and James were, or you can be like how many of us naturally are. We're inflexible with our plans and we're not gracious with people when they disappoint us. We need to be gracious with people even when they disappoint us. I feel like I lived this situation back in April. I went to Georgia to shoot that show, and I'm staying in the host's house. This guy who's well known throughout the whole country. I'm staying in his guest bedroom upstairs. I fly in on Monday, and Monday night, I'm up half the night, sick. And in the morning, I waddle downstairs, ready to go out and do work with this guy whose time is very valuable. And I go out to work with this guy, and I come downstairs, right, from like his kid's old bedroom. It's weird, right? I'm staying in his house. He's feeding me his food, right? And I come downstairs, and I am so sick. And I try to do my hair, brush my teeth. I try to look all as good as I can. I'm like, yeah, let's go. And he's like, hey, John, I'm like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, I think I'm a little sick. And he's like, okay, sit down. And then he talks to me for 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes of talking to me, he's like, you're not going anywhere today. He's like, you're going to sit your butt here, son. You're going to, I was like, Dad, what? And so you're going to stay here, and let's make some food. So he goes, and he gets his jam and his peanut butter, and he makes this really cool peanut butter toast, and he's making that for me, and he's taking care of me, and his wife's like, oh, honey, I'll get you. You want medicine? I'll get you medicine. What you want? And then she just goes and brings back the whole pharmacy. It's on the counter, and I stay in this guy's house, and I drink 3 gallons of orange juice, and they just helped me out. And I felt bad because I'm like, I'm here to serve you. I'm in your house, supposed to work for your show, to do your thing, and here you are serving me, right? There's 2 responses that they could have had. They could have been bummed. They could have been like, oh, well, let's just tough it out. Just, who cares, right? Or they could have done what they did, which is what Paul did, is be nice, be gracious, be kind, be hospitable, and ultimately ended up praising me, even though I felt like I didn't deserve it. I got sick. That kind of love is a type of family love. Feels like they're your parents, right? Feels like when you go in situations like that, when people really take care of you, if it's a little old lady, it's like, man, you're the grandma I never had, crazy, right? That type of family love is what should be going on in the church. That's the kind of love Epaphroditus had for the Philippians. It's the kind of love the Philippians had for Epaphroditus. It's the kind of love that Paul had for Epaphroditus. It's the kind of love that Timothy had for the Philippians. Just notice all these networks and webs of this person really loves this person, really serves this person. That is how the church should work. That's how the narrow should work. That's also how your small group should work. And how your family should work. That if we got real Christians, that we're serving one another. I encourage you this week, be like Timothy, love. Be like Epaphroditus, serve. Be like Paul, be gracious when plans fail. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for letting us get together and learn from your word. I pray that we'd be like Timothy, and we'd be like Epaphroditus, and we'd be like Paul. They're such good examples to us of what it looks like to give our all to serve. Pray that would stem from genuine love like Timothy had. Pray that we would be kind and considerate this week, that we'd learn how to help out and serve. Sometimes we're confused about it and we don't know how. Thank you for teaching us in your word through the examples of Epaphroditus and Timothy and Paul. I pray that we'd seek to live that out and that you'd be pleased with how we do that this week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, you are dismissed.